Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming Thank you everyone for coming today for our presentation, Strategies for Working with Homeless Youth and Families. Today's presentation is going to be hosted by Cass, and our presenters are LaMonica McLear and David Johnston. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Everyone will be muted. Please ask any questions in the chat. We will be addressing them following the presentation. Again, this webinar will be recorded and posted on the CAS website and YouTube channel. I want to briefly go over what CAS is. CAS is a Community Assistance Service Subcommittee. It is through the COC. It's a network of committees and subcommittees to achieve various goals. CAS has regular presentations from local organizations who work with at-risk or homeless populations. We discuss barriers and gaps in this housing system and propose solutions to improve the system. This virtual conference will cover an overview of McKinney Vento and navigating the school system, as well as best practices for completing trauma-informed assessments for youth. I want to welcome our first presenter today. I want to welcome LaMonica McLear. She is the Executive Director of ERESC, McKinney Vento Program, and Migrant Education Programs. For her presentation, please feel free to use the chat. She has advised that during her presentation, feel free to unmute yourself. Questions are welcome. And we will have a 5-minute break after her presentation.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you so much, Melissa, for the introduction. As stated, my name is LaMonica McIver, and I'm the Executive Director of McKinney Vento and Migrant Education here at Regional Educational Services Commission. I'm just going to share my screen for a presentation. If you have any questions during the time, please feel free to either raise your hand or drop your questions in the chat. And definitely I'll be sure to, stop to answer any questions or anything that you all may have. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. It's okay for everyone. All righty. So we're going to try to take a quick dive into the McKinney Vento Education Program. Just so you know, the McKinney Vento Act is actually a federal legislation that was passed by Congress to basically create a law and barriers and laws and different. I'm sorry, can you guys hear me? I'm sorry, I thought I heard somebody say there's no sound. Hopefully you can hear me. Anyway, so the McKinney Vento Act is, like I said, is a legislative act, a law that was passed by Congress to basically give families that are displaced, who are homeless, to say the least, special protections throughout their time of being in education and trying to get their education. Most of the times prior to the act being passed, a lot of families were not allowed to register for school, not given different supplemental assistance being in school, and that created a hardship for those families that are already facing a hardship by not having, a place to stay. To then have to fight with the school district and the school system to educate their students. It definitely was a difficult time before the act was passed. So what is McKinney Vento? The definition of McKinney Vento, it's any person, family, student who lacks a fixed, regular, or adequate nighttime residence. This includes the children and youth that are runaways, that have left, that don't have an adult guardian, McKinney Vento can fall underneath sharing housing. We do have a lot of times where families are doubling up, living with relatives, living with friends because they can't afford to have a place of their own. They could be living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, camping grounds due to lack of alternative adequate accommodations or a regular nighttime residence. They could be living in emergency or transitional shelters or any shelter for that matter, abandoned in hospitals, living in public or private places not designed for ordinary use as a regular sleeping accommodation for human beings. So this could be someone living in a bus station or pen station, outside on park benches, and thus far, definitely living in abandoned buildings. We see many cases of such. So this is the definition for McKinney Vento. So we also, as I mentioned earlier, we also have situations where youth are unaccompanied. That means they have left a guardian, a foster home, or their biological parents for whatever reason, and they are homeless and they're unaccompanied. Those youth also are eligible and can qualify as McKinney Vento. The students must both be homeless and without a physical custody of a guardian to be McKinney Vento eligible. The state deems them or to be unaccompanied youth. And definitely this would mean that they are homeless and they are without any guardian that is, helping raise them or giving them any assistance. Okay. So understanding youth homelessness, some common causes of youth homelessness, it could be abuse or neglect. Many kids are, running away because of abuse and neglect in different households. It could be problems at home with pregnancy, sexual orientation, gender identity, blended family issues. Definitely economic challenges can present such, and then also shelter policies. Sometimes older students, especially sometimes being older boys, they're not accepted in some shelters, so they're usually left on their own. And this definitely creates a situation for unaccompanied youth that is homeless. Okay. Many of the youth, they definitely experience different challenges for sure. I mean, definitely if you don't have a place to stay and you're battling homelessness, definitely sometimes there are mental and health and substance abuse issues, criminal issues. Sometimes our students are assaulted, rather them or their families that they have, are homeless with. Criminal activity is always an issue sometimes. And of course, pregnancy is always a big issue too for families for children or unaccompanied youth to go off on their own. So a lot of times in education, we face situations where, especially here in New Jersey, we have a lot of unaccounted for homeless students in the educational system, many times because families are not reporting that they're homeless. They're scared to say that they're homeless. And so that creates a lot of barriers to identification. Sometimes families, we spend a lot of time going around educating families in different shelters and different locations about McKinney Vento and their rights, because that's the number one problem, the lack of understanding McKinney Vento and the definition of what homelessness is. Some other barriers could be the desire to avoid the stigma associated with homelessness. Folks are embarrassed. Their pride won't allow them to share that they're homeless. Discomfort in discussing the circumstances is definitely a big issue. Fear of being treated differently by school personnel, or even sometimes folks feel like they can be reported to, child welfare or DCF because they are homeless. Some identification strategies we try to discuss with school districts as well as our different community organizations that are working with homeless families is to definitely create a welcome and supportive environment, rather it's in school or any nonprofit organization working with displaced families. Develop a youth-friendly outreach materials that are distributed to them. We like to definitely promote posters and flyers and brochures to our families that are experiencing homelessness or are unaccompanied youth, to give them more information about what their rights are and what can be afforded to them. Definitely creating a trust relationship, right? They're only going to feel comfortable to share with you different, information if they feel that the relationship is trustworthy, and that what they discuss with you is confidential. Another thing too that is important to know is that in New Jersey, the Department of Education has regulated to all school districts, both charter, private, and public schools, that they must have a homeless liaison in their building. That tends to all homeless families, all students that have notified the school district that they are homeless. Most of the time we get calls from our different organizations or shelters to say, how do we navigate? How do we get these families help or students help? Well, the number one thing is to coordinate with the homeless liaison at the school building. On the New Jersey website, which I'll share.
Is she frozen for everyone or just?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't
she's
hear her.
frozen.
I believe
Lamonica.
she's frozen.
Yeah, I don't hear her either.
Okay, just wondering.
Well, Monica, if you can put in the chat whether or not you can hear us. Oh, okay, she signed out. She'll probably sign right back in. I'm gonna pause recording.
This meeting is being recorded.
All right, are we good? I didn't stop any recording, just FYI. Okay, hopefully we're good. Anyway, I was saying that this homeless liaison will help navigate whatever is needed, for that student and that family. They also are supplied with different resources, different other organizations that can help them with different things, whether it's food pantry, assistance with trying to find a place to stay, short-term hotel stay information, all of that stuff. School districts and their homeless liaisons are deemed to assist.
I think it's this weather. Is it raining over where you guys are? Because it's raining by me in Old Bridge.
Yes, it's raining. I think that's
Yeah.
what it is. Light rain.
Oh.
If they need other assistance like a social worker, psychiatry, all of these different services are available at the school level, where they can definitely get assistance there. All right, I'm just going to stop to make sure that there are not any questions. Okay. All right. I'm going to I'm getting notification that my internet is a little bit unstable. So I'm just going to stop my video because sometimes that can help with the broadband. Okay. All righty. So moving along, just a little bit more about homelessness creates barriers. Definitely some of the things that we see a lot that are common with our students that are facing or battling homelessness in schools is that of course, they're hungry, they're tired, they need school supplies, as I mentioned, they don't have reliable transportation. Sometimes if it's an unaccompanied youth, there's no parent or guardian to help. Lack of stable housing, definitely, of course, obviously. And then also to the decline into having, a consistent laundry and bathing facilities, which some of our school districts have set up, like laundry rooms that they have available to students where students can use, as well as access to bathing facilities, especially at a secondary high school or secondary school. They have access to lockers and a location where students can, use if they're homeless, to, bathe and having clean clothes. Some of our schools even provide uniforms and have clothing locations where they can get clothing and things of that nature. So that's just a little bit about the homelessness barriers. I'm just going to keep moving along. So just as mentioned below, some student engagement strategies. Definitely, as I mentioned, some of the school districts have created shower and laundry facilities at their locations. Many districts implement policies to assist with accumulating credits towards graduation for our older students that are, experiencing homelessness. Some create credit recovery and different things because many times they've missed a lot of days of school. They need to make up for credits, and our goal is to, get them graduated and get them to the next step and next level in their life, that they can be able to have a, decent job, go on to college if that's what they want to do, trade school. So those policies help with assisting our older students, finish across the finish line. Definitely becoming familiar with eligibility criteria for local social services and housing programs. So most of our school districts, if not all, in some of our county locations, they usually bring in our housing departments and different housing organizations that can help with helping find housing, more permanent housing for our families. Definitely providing some flexibility around school assignments and different things in schools that the students may need, that they may not be able to meet as a regular deadline for students, for students who are experiencing homelessness. Sometimes it's more difficult to meet those deadlines. Definitely becoming more familiar with state laws about minor medical consent. Sometimes our unaccompanied youth, they are not with a guardian, so there's no guardian that can sign off for them. And definitely they have the right, if they're dependent, to sign off on their own. One of the things that is really important to note is that when there's a situation when a family is homeless, they are deemed by law to be immediately enrolled. Sometimes we see school districts, they stop students, like, stopping mom from registering her kids because, hey, I can't find birth certificate. I don't have the shot records, I don't have this. The school district cannot do that by law. They have to enroll the student immediately, and they can tell them, hey, bring back these items by next Friday, or sometimes even families need assistance with getting the shot records and different things. They can, point them into directions of like county health departments that can help them assist with getting these different, items that they need. But at the end of the day, no school district can say, hey, you can't, come in, we can't register your kid today. If the family goes and they say, hey, I am homeless, I do not have this, we're living in a shelter in town, and I now want my child to go to this school, the school must enroll the student. If for whatever reason, if that's not happening, most of the time parents or, even an advocate that's helping the family can contact my office, or they can contact the DOE to file a complaint and let them know, like, we're being told, no, we can't register, this student in school. So definitely immediate enrollment is law. Okay, I'm just making sure. Yes, for someone who asked me, I think it was Margie. I'm just checking the chat box as well. The slides will be available. Someone from the team will send these out when we're done. Okay, so that's more about enrollment. So I'm going to continue on. One of the things which is always a barrier with McKinney Vento students, especially when they're bouncing from town to town, from city to city, they're staying with different, family members. Folks always want to know, like, what school are they deemed or eligible to go to? So let's say, for example, hypothetically, I'm homeless. I became homeless out of I don't know, Elizabeth, New Jersey, right? But now I'm in Butler and I'm staying with, friends and family because I lost my housing in Elizabeth. And I have, students that have been going to Elizabeth public schools. Just because they're homeless and they've now in Butler doesn't mean they have to pick up their students or their children and go register in Butler. If they want to, they can, if that's the choice of the family, the guardian. But if they want to stay in Elizabeth public schools because that's the, school environment they're familiar with, they've been there, it's working out well for them there, and the parent doesn't want to disrupt their education, then they can stay in Elizabeth public schools. They do not have to transfer their child to Butler if they don't want to. And Elizabeth is responsible for making sure that they give transportation to the student, that the student is, being bused from Butler or whatever town they may be in for that matter, because as a homeless child, a homeless student, they have the right to stay in the school of origin, which would be Elizabeth, and to continue their education. And they will continue to, to do this until they are not homeless anymore. If they chose to say, if the guardian chose to say, hey, we don't want to go to Elizabeth anymore. It's just, too much of a distance. We're in Butler now. I want to make it easier. We're going to go to Butler, and register there. Then the child can go to Butler as well and register there if that is the choice. So they have two options. They can go to the local attendance area school, which is the school where they're currently at. Currently staying at, rather than a shelter, motel, or with a friend, or not any of that. They're just deemed homeless. They can go to that school, or they can stay in their school of origin, which is the school district in which they became homeless in. Hopefully that's clear for everyone. If you have any questions about that, definitely feel free to drop that in the slide as well. Someone in the chat asked about what's the turnaround time. We usually get back to, we work every day, all day, even after hours. So anytime someone contacts my office about a situation with the homeless family needing assistance with the school district, we usually get right back to you, or we point you in the right direction for that homeless liaison to help for that school district. That was from Ms. Diaz, I believe, that asked that question. All right. It's always the best thing to side on the side of caution for the best interest of the child. We recently had a situation this week where we had a family that was displaced from out of Passaic. No, I'm sorry, displaced out of Patterson. However, the family was like all the way in South Jersey, and they were staying with families in South Jersey. But the mom was like, my student, this was a younger child, still wants to go to Patterson public schools. Well, that might not be in the best interest, right? Why? Because how will we be able to get the child from from South Jersey all the way to Patterson every morning? I mean, the child will need to be on the bus by 5:45 a.m. in the morning to be able to be coming from literally South Jersey to Patterson. It's like from one side of New Jersey to the other. Is that in the best interest of the child? Probably not. I would highly likely say, no, that's not, because at the end of the day, the child will have to be spending most of the day waking up super early, getting home super late to be bused, and that's not in the best interest. So the best interest for mom, when we told her, look, it might be best to register that child in South Jersey, because at the end of the day, kind of trying to bring them to Patterson every day is just not going to be in the best interest of that child's education. So we're always erring on the caution side of what is the best interest for the child, because we don't want to have them in a situation, that definitely just creates hardship for them. One of the questions in the chat is what happens when they come from another state? When they come from another state, whatever town that they're in, they definitely have to register in that town. One thing about McKinney Vento, it doesn't cross state lines. So while McKinney Vento definitely state to state, they're into the guidelines of the McKinney Vento Act, we can transport, for example, from Pennsylvania to New Jersey. Once they come from Pennsylvania, they're displaced from Pennsylvania, and now they're here in New Jersey, they have to register with the local school district in New Jersey where they are. We've never had a situation where we cross state lines, or we have a situation where we're, sending them from New York to New Jersey every day. Literally, once they get here in New Jersey, they're our responsibility in terms of, and we can't even bill Pennsylvania or New York. I'm only using them as an example because they're close by. We wouldn't even be able to bill them or call them and say, hey, to a school district in New Jersey, in New York, you're responsible for this student that came from here. We cannot do that. Once they get here, they're ours. We can assist with trying to get old school documents and different things of that nature. But the transportation of back and forth, we would not be able to do that. And that was for both Melissas. It's two Melissas actually that asked the same question for you. Hopefully that's clear. All right, moving right along. As mentioned too, the school of origin where they became homeless, the city and the city where the school district, in the school district where they became homeless at, they're always responsible for establishing transportation for the student. It's the same scenario that I just gave regarding the Elizabeth to Butler scenario. If the students, chose to stay in Elizabeth or they chose to be in Butler, Elizabeth would still be responsible for transporting the student from either location, depending on what school the mom decided that she wanted them to go to. They're responsible for the finance of that because the family became homeless in that particular school district in that city. So they would be responsible for that. The only time that disappears or that's not, the case anymore is if a family becomes domiciled in another city. So if I, was in Elizabeth, I'm now in Butler, the Elizabeth started out coordinating the transportation for my students or my children to go to Butler, and now they're being, transported, or they're going from Elizabeth to, they're going from Butler to Elizabeth every day. If I stay in Butler for 365 days, then I become domiciled in Butler, and now I'm Butler's Butler Board of Education's responsibility if I'm there for 365 days consistently. So the guidelines, the law does say if you become domiciled in another city, then the school of origin wouldn't be responsible anymore for transportation or the educational finance for that student. Hopefully that's clear. If not, definitely feel free to drop a question in the chat. Okay, so here are just some more resources, which when they send over the PowerPoint to you, you'll be able to click right on these links. They're actual hyperlinks. So these are different guidelines and different things you can share with, families that you may be working with, or your different staff at your locations or your organizations that you're at, regarding determining eligibility for McKinney Vento rights and services, determining eligibility flow chart. So all of these things are super helpful that you can, share with folks that you work with on a daily, or you can use as a tool to basically help to determine McKinney Vento, or just more information on rights and services that are offered for McKinney Vento families. More links as well. This is directly from the Department of Education, different resources and guidance for McKinney Vento families as well. And that concludes my presentation, overall general review of McKinney Vento. Definitely, if you have any questions, definitely feel free to, reach out to us. We service Essex, Hudson, Morrison, Union County for McKinney Vento. The state has different agencies and different organizations that service different counties. These are the ones we service, but if you happen to be in another county or need information on another county, we do have my counterparts, which are I call them my sister or brotherly regions, that we can connect you to the other directors in the other areas that will be able to assist you and answer any questions or help in other counties as well. But definitely, if you have any questions or anything, definitely feel free to reach out to me. Here's my email address and definitely my extension. I will drop the link into the chat box in regards to the homeless liaisons, how you can reach them. And then also too, I will make sure that the presentation is shared with Melissa and the team over there, and Heather, to share with you as well. At this time, I'll take any questions, anything that someone may want to come off mute and ask or drop in the chat.
Well, Monica, we do have a question from someone. The question is, as you know, we have had an influx of undocumented people in New Jersey. How do you navigate the documentation requirements for registration? It could take months for someone to obtain the documents. During this time, would the child be allowed to attend school?
Yes, if they're considered homeless. As far as just undocumented or migrants or immigrants that are coming, that those are different laws that the school districts have to follow when they have an influx of folks coming from out of the country. But in terms of McKinney Vento, if there is someone who comes here from another country, they're not with a sponsor, they're homeless, and they don't have documentation, and they're considered McKinney Vento, they are immediately enrolled with or without the documentation. Ms. Diaz actually has her hand raised.
Yeah, that was my question. I just want to follow up. So is it the definition of HUD of homelessness, Or is there another definition that because it's so, the HUD definition of homelessness is so restrictive? You know, you have to technically be street homeless. Couch surfing for me technically is homeless. Or sleeping in a garage or an attic is homeless, but the HUD definition is so restrictive. So what should we know about the definition of homelessness?
So Ms. Diaz, in the beginning of the presentation, that was my first slide, the definition of what homelessness is. We don't follow HUD termination, we follow McKinney Vento, the McKinney Vento Act, which is basically literally anyone who is not without adequate nighttime residence. And so that it was a whole list of different homelessness. So they can be going from house to house. They could be doubling up, living in a place with a friend because they can't find a place to stay. They can be in a trailer park. They can be staying on a bench. So there was a whole listing of lists that determines McKinney Vento eligibility. I can't speak to what HUD guidelines are. I'm speaking specifically regarding the McKinney Vento Act and what that definition is.
Perfect. I just needed to hear it. I saw it in the slide. I just definitely needed to hear it again. Thank you.
Yeah. We have to, by law, for any student who is getting educated in New Jersey, we have to follow the actual McKinney Vento Act definition and no other definition. Like we just can't, as educators and in school districts, that is what we deemed appropriate for McKinney Vento Act by law, by Congress.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're
Wonderful
welcome.
presentation.
You're welcome. No problem. Thank you. Ms. Sears?
Hi, I just had a question about working with families who are experiencing homelessness and the McKinney Vento Act. If the school district or the school itself is giving the family or the child a difficult time about enrollment, would you encourage us going through McKinney Vento first rather than going through the school? Like, is there like an application process with you guys that would be more beneficial to work with the child in the school system versus just going directly through the school?
So anytime you're working with a family in a school district within those counties that I mentioned are giving you a hard time, call me right here. You're going to call me. I'm going to call that school. I'm going to speak to that homeless liaison, sometimes even speak to the superintendent, and we're going to have an issue because at the bottom line is we are advocates for those families that are experiencing homelessness. And for whatever reason, whatever it could be, I mean, I can write you a book on a different case by case scenarios that we've gone through that, you know, homeless families have had to battle, but we basically get on the phone with them and we let them know, we send them like notices of, you know, being out of order for these students, and we basically fight that case. And sometimes we have to pull in help from the Department of Education, from our coordinator that is in Trenton to, you know, basically sanction that school district for, you know, not doing what they're supposed to be doing as they are deemed to be doing for homeless families. So anytime, that's why definitely I'll put my information in the chat too. And definitely if you're having any issues with those students, with those families in their school district, feel free to reach out to me.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Ms. McCarthy?
Hi, I had a question. So I work at, I'm a case manager at a homeless shelter. So when our families move in, we either we set up transportation with the liaisons to the district that they're in. But recently and last year, more than this year, we've seen schools just have a transportation shortage. So they're not able to set up that transportation. Is that something that like we can reach out to you that you could help with, or is that just a statewide issue?
So really it's a statewide issue, unfortunately. We honestly, in so many years, we have, sometimes it's been on a decline, sometimes it's not that bad. But this year, I mean, just with the shortage of everything seeming to be happening after the pandemic, there has been a big shortage in transportation, especially when it's just traditional busing, because there's a shortage on busing, I mean, throughout the country, but specifically here in New Jersey. Some school districts have done things that are a little bit more creative. Like, for example, if for whatever reason, if the homeless family drives, they will offer like gas cards to, you know, the family. If the family can, you know, take a bus or something like that, they will offer bus tickets or bus cards, or even a train ticket for that matter, for the families. And then even in recent, sometimes if the school district is open and willing to doing that, they've even went to using like Lyft and Uber for the students and their parent to get back and forth to school, because not because they don't want to, they're not doing it because they don't want to provide transportation. There's just no transportation to, get via busing. It's been a big hardship.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Ms. Diaz?
I promise, this is the last question, I promise.
That's okay. No, it's okay with me as long as it's okay with the host.
Oh, well, I promise this is the last question, everyone. Is there a directory or any kind of information where we can get a list of all of the homeless liaisons for the schools, so that we could have a list available for the people, especially in my agency? I would love to have the people that work directly with children to have them, posted somewhere.
Yes, you're answering you're asking all of the right questions, Ms. Diaz.
Thank you.
Just want to let you know, yes, there is a link on the state's website. I'm going to drop that in the chat as well, where you can access, no matter what county, no matter what school district, charter or public, traditional, let me get this right, traditional public or charter, which charter is public too. Want to make sure I'm getting that right. You can be able to get the name of the person, telephone number, and email address for any school district. So I'll drop that in there so you can share with your team.
Thank you so much.
And we did have one question in the chat, and it says, are they considered students with special needs? And if so, do they work with the Office of Special Needs at the school?
So every student that is deemed to be McKinney Vento eligible is not special education. They can be, a selling student with no IEP. If there is a student, you can have a student that is considered special education. They have an IEP and they're homeless, but just because you're McKinney Vento doesn't mean that you are special needs. In order to be deemed special needs, you would have to have an IEP that is determined by the school district that they're attending. So they would have to have an evaluation and thus far, but just because they're McKinney Vento doesn't mean that they're special needs. Any other questions before? I'm sorry, Heather, am I okay to ask if there are any more questions?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's going to be time at the very end after David's for questions for either of you as well. So if people come up with questions in the meantime, we will have a couple minutes at the end, time allowing. But
cool. All right, well, if not, I'm going to turn it over to Heather for you to introduce David. I don't want to take up too much time, and I'm going to be still on dropping the information in the chat for all of the stuff that I promised.
okay, well, at this time, we are going to take a quick 5-minute break just so everybody can get up and stretch, use the bathroom, get a drink, whatever you need to do. So we'll come back here at 10:45 and we will go on to David's presentation. So thank you, LaMonica.
This meeting is being recorded.
Presentation, so.
I'll give everyone a couple more moments to get settled. Hopefully everyone got up, walked around, stretched their legs, got their drink, settling in. Thank you so much again, LaMonica. And LaMonica did put in all her information to get in touch with her and resources. We will be sharing her slides as well. So look out for that email. And again, this presentation will be posted on the CAS YouTube channel. Okay, without any further ado, I want to welcome David Johnston, the Community Liaison and Resource Specialist for Deidre's House. We will be taking all chats and addressing them at the end. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And I want to welcome David.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Right.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm hoping it's raining here too. So I'm hoping that that doesn't impact my Wi-Fi. I had some trouble last night with my Wi-Fi as well. Thank you. That was a great presentation on McKinney Vento. It was really interesting, a good refresher for me. So I am the resource specialist and community liaison with Deidre's House, which is Morris County's Child Advocacy Center. I've been there about 4 years. Just quick background, before that, I worked for New Jersey's Child Welfare Agency, DCPMP, formerly DIFAS, for about 34 years. And so that's really my big connection to this kind of field. But I have been involved with several committees, the CASP, formerly CEASE committee, and I'm currently the chair for the CAYAC, the Youth Services Advisory Committee in Morris County. So I recognize some of the names popping up here and there from the nonprofit, so it's good to see you. I just want to preface this discussion today with, that I'm not making any assumptions that y'all aren't using some of these strategies and techniques with the youth and families you work with. And not all of the scenarios and examples are going to be completely representative of the demographic of the folks that we work with, because there's just such disparity in that population. So I'm not as coordinated as LaMonica, so I have some assistance with technology. So I appreciate Melissa and Heather doing that. So I'll just say next slide as we move along, or can you click on that? And I'll do my best to move as quickly as possible. I may pause just to say thoughts on something, but we will hold any kind of substantive questions to the end. Okay, thank you. So we could move on to the next one. So we're all talking, I want to be clear about what it is we're going to be looking at today, right? So these are the learning objectives, and the purposes of this training is really coming in the form of an overview. And there are resources at the end that are more substantive and help you to more robustly explore the objectives that we're looking at right here. It's a wide range, 13 to 24. So the strategies that we're going to be talking about should be applicable across that range. We'll be learning about what creating safe spaces mean, and it really is affirming all youth, up to and including various subpopulations. The screening objective for safety, abuse, and neglect, that's not coming from a clinical headset at all. It's just suggestions about how to gather some of that information when those youth and those families come to your attention, your program, whether it be residential or otherwise. And then we want to be able to take a look at how do we understand where the youth and families are coming from, what are their strengths, what's their skill set, and also what are their needs, and what kind of support systems do they have, or do they have them? Do we have to start from square one? And then at the end, we're looking at local resources and referrals to support the youth that you're working with. And then there's also some more academic material resource slide that we'll take a look at the very end. Okay, next slide, please. So I put this in often in different presentations. I don't know, for me, in my work over the 30-something years, it always represented the month of September. It's just, and my wife, who's retired guidance counselor, and both my kids who are teachers, we all have that view of September. But I think over the last couple of years, it's felt like September to a lot of us for more than just September. You're pushing this rock, you think you're prepared, and you're pushing this rock up this hill, often with little support, sometimes in the community, and sometimes that's what our families are feeling as well. Next slide, please. So there are numerous, as this slide talked about, right? There's numerous ways that the folks we work with come to us, right? There's lots of different pathways into homelessness, the social piece, right? The economic piece, health conditions, all drive youth homelessness. And some of the pathways are so specific to the youth population. I think LaMonica talked about it a little bit before too, about being abandoned by parents or abuse or neglect, running away from home, aging out of one of the many systems that these youth could be involved with. Many of them are multi-system involved. They have histories of housing instability, discrimination, right? Feelings of marginalization, and, you know, the results of choices that they may have made, that we all make sometimes, and that are missteps. So we need to be aware of that, and then kind of have the tools to kind of figure out how to help them look at that differently, to reframe that, and then move past it. Before we look at one specific way, the ACEs, I don't know if you're familiar with it. Over the last 5 years, it's really been brought to the forefront again. It's a study from the 90s, which, yeah, as studies go, it's a bit older, but I think it's kind of seminal in many ways in the way it looks at the commonality of these challenges that all of us have, and certainly homelessness exacerbates that. But one of the prominent scholars in the field, Dr. Gabor Mate, says that as helpers, we should remember one specific thing, that youth, and you probably see this, youth and their families in this particular population have this attachment to pain, yet they have such a disconnect from self, others, and community. So think about that for a minute, and whether or not that resonates with some of the work that we're doing. And then we'll take a look at this video, Heather Armless, if you could move to that. I'm hoping, does the audio work?
Give me 1 second to get the
Sure.
audio to work. Sorry. I think I just have to stop sharing and then share
Sure.
again.
Patients have begun to lose a noticeable amount of weight, they drop out of the program. He decides to meet with patients one-on-one to determine why. The answers are startling. He discovers that many of his patients had been sexually abused as children, and he realizes that for some of his patients, excess eating and weight gain are not simply a matter of lack of control or education. They are in fact a protective mechanism and a way of coping with the bad experiences from their past. After partnering with Dr. Robert Anda at the Centers for Disease Control, Dr. Ferlitti's investigation was expanded to cover 17,000 largely middle-class adult patients in the Kaiser Permanente system. The survey asked them about their history with 10 different potentially adverse childhood experiences, known as ACEs, grouped in 3 categories: abuse, physical, emotional, sexual; neglect, physical and emotional; and household dysfunction, mental illness, incarcerated household member, a mother who was treated violently, substance abuse, and divorce. For each type of adverse childhood experience, the person was given a point, and the points were tallied. For instance, a person whose parents were divorced and whose father was incarcerated and suffered from addiction received an ACE score of 3. Again, the researchers could not believe what they found. 67% had at least 1 ACE. Over 20% had 3 or more ACEs. 11% experienced 5 or more categories. The researchers determined that higher ACE scores correlated with an increase in risk for problems like substance abuse, smoking, and depression, and also for physical health problems like cancer, diabetes, stroke, and heart disease. And here's the most surprising part. Adverse childhood experiences make a person more susceptible to adult diseases, regardless of coping behaviors like smoking or substance abuse. Preventing disease, then, goes beyond exercising, eating right, and getting good medical care. It means reducing adverse childhood experiences.
So it was really a dramatic finding, one, that they were so prevalent, and 2, that they had such a direct impact on outcomes later in life.
And what exactly causes these ACEs to impact health later in life?
Well, we think the mechanism is related to chronic stress and what's now called toxic stress. Not all stress is bad, but toxic stress is where it is extreme or persistent or severe enough that your body, it never recovers from that initial stressful response.
Biologically, what happens is that we are able to do things in crisis that we're not able to do when we're not in crisis. So all of our muscles, all of our brain chemistry, all of the functioning of the body is always alert, and that puts an incredible amount of stress on the organs, on the psyche, on my ability to think, my ability to concentrate beyond just surviving and managing the crisis. And what we're learning is that there's a lot of chronic illnesses that are related to be living under toxic stress, especially domestic violence has been one of the symptoms cited for that. And therefore, when people have immune disorders and when they have chronic pain, a lot of physicians are being invited and encouraged to ask about a history of domestic violence or child abuse.
I think the ACEs study is a game changer, truly a game changer for Kentucky and for every state. To me, what the ACEs study does is it puts research and numbers behind common sense.
According to the National Survey of Children's Health, more children experience 3 or more adverse child experiences during their first 8 years in Kentucky than any state in the country besides Montana.
The cost of not addressing these adverse childhood experiences early in life are huge. Even if you just look at toxic stress and what happens in early school age. Again, the kids that can't pay attention, maybe because they're suffering toxic stress from their home environment, and those kids are going to fail. They're going to fail grades in school, they're going to drop out of school early. People that never develop this skill of relationships begin to feel isolation, they don't have any close friends, and those are the kids, if you look at the school shootings that have happened around the country, many times that's a factor in those. People desperately need a sense of belonging, and if they don't get that from proper social and emotional development growing up, then those are the kids that seek out gangs later in life. I think the Adverse Childhood Experiences study tells us that risky behaviors like using alcohol, using drugs, particularly IV drug use, those studies indicate that 80% of IV drug use can be attributed to adverse childhood experience. So the importance of working on those early on is really, really critical, because obviously we all know that remediation is really, really difficult. Once children get into those behavior patterns, it's very difficult to turn them around. And once adults are in those behavior patterns, then what do they model to the next generation?
In Dr. Felidi's words, improving parenting skills across the nation may well be the most important public health advancement of our time.
All right.
This program was funded in part by
Great. Next slide, please. So we see some of the issues that were talked about just on the previous slide emerge with the youth through the study that ACE conducted. It is amazing to see that, and probably not such news to you folks who deal with this on a daily basis, but I think it's worth mentioning again that where people come from. I know I did a training a couple of years ago for youth facilities in a county to remind them about asking that question about what happened to you or what happened to them versus what's wrong with you. Coincidentally, the title of Dr. Bruce Perry, a child psychiatrist, most recent book. And that kind of lens, to look through that kind of lens, I think helps us understand where people are coming from and intervene in more helpful ways. So some of the common themes that we were seeing, right, were these reported experiences of adult perpetrated trauma of youth coming into the systems that we're working with. And because those adults are generally significant adults in the lives of those youth, that really translates into what we call complex trauma, something that happens over and over again by someone who's very close to you. And it's different from kind of single event trauma. And it certainly is more problematic to move past. A lot of these folks, in your experience too, I'm sure you have this, is that they have a suspicion of healthcare providers, even an avoidance of health professionals. And exacerbating that suspicion in this particular population are those youth who are undocumented. Next slide, please. So to what degree, I like visuals, right? So to what degree do we see these factors in the youth that you work with? At this point, that's sort of a rhetorical question. But generally, I would imagine it's not typically too high, because we are working with youth and families that have higher ACE scores. And so typically they have had more limited opportunities to develop these resiliency factors that we see. So our interventions and how we plan and map them out are very important. And again, it's made even worse if what they've experienced, the trauma they've experienced, is complex in nature. There's research out there that says, the more experiences or trauma that youth or families experience makes them more resilient. So, adversity breeding character, or not only character, but confidence. But I guess I would say that if there is any resilience around that or truth to that limited research, we'd probably have to put an asterisk on it and think about the other baggage that comes with that. Next slide, please. So another tool I think that we can use, and this is related to mindfulness, which I think has gotten some traction right alongside the whole ACEs study. But this quote I love. I think it's really kind of indicative of how we can help youth. So I'll read it quickly and think about it for a minute while I'm reading. So look at that bird that's sitting on the tree, right? And the bird's they're never afraid that the branch is breaking because of their trust, not on the branch, but on their own wings, right? Translating into, you always believe in yourself, or try to always believe in yourself, or escalate the way or the number of times you believe in yourself. And that, I think, could be sort of like some of the underpinning of the work that we have with these youth and families in creating this mindset. There's not a way for us to avoid challenges, certainly, or adverse events that get in our way. That's part of the joys and challenges, right, of life. And that's part of what we can do with these youth and families, is help them reframe things like that when the challenges do come up. Okay, next slide, please. So one of the ways and one of the tools that we can help youth and families create this resilience mindset is looking at intentionality and how we do that. And here, these are some 5 specific things. One, and you've probably heard this, right? Live in the present. It's very difficult for, I think, any of us to be doing that today, given what's happened for the last couple of years. Excuse me. We're always thinking about what we're going to do at 3 o'clock or tomorrow or this evening or next week or this coming weekend. It's hard for us who have more of a skill set to live in the present. So because these youth have experienced so many traumas, they're frequently revisiting the past. So recovery takes hold, though, when there's more frequent experience with being present, and where they can reflect on missteps and trying to correct them and moving forward. So that's one of the key things. One of the 5 intentions that's important is to help them live in the present moment. And the second, if we can just click on that link, just a quick kind of fun slide. It's really partially rooted, if you're familiar with the prayer for AA, right? It's just another visual to kind of remind us, great poster to keep around your agency so families and others, staff, can see it, right? There's that circle of what you can control. Those are the things to spend your energy on. And, to a degree, spin your wheels on. Outside of that, it really is something that you sort of just need to let go and reset on. Thank you. If we move on to the next one. So this is talking about choosing and energizing positive and empowering thoughts. So it's just a real quick video that's very, I think, thought-provoking.
Usually attributed to the Native American tradition, which illuminates different ways of paying attention. An elder, talking to a child, says, "I have two wolves fighting in my heart. One wolf is fearful, vengeful, envious, resentful, and deceitful. The other wolf is compassionate, loving, generous, truthful, and peaceful." The child asks, "Which wolf will win the fight?" The elder responds, "The one I feed." That doesn't mean we try to deny or hurt or kill the angry wolf. If we did that, we'd end up in a long battle, all the while somehow making that wolf more powerful through our hostility and fear. Hating that wolf sucks the strength right out of us. Instead, we calmly pay attention to the angry wolf and let go of believing they have the answers. If we can do that, they end up lying down next to us, no longer an enemy. We help strengthen the kind and loving wolf, giving it nourishment and support so that we can follow it. That peaceful wolf can become our steady companion and show us the way through all kinds of different life experiences. Restful or chaotic, enjoyable or disappointing experiences may come and go, but we can have a guide with us through it all. This is what mindfulness can help you do. Mindfulness allows us to see our thoughts and feelings as they are beginning. It's very powerful to know what we're feeling as we're feeling it, know what we're thinking as we're thinking it. With mindfulness, we can choose what will strengthen and bring into action, and we can choose what we will gently let go of. We don't have to be at the mercy of old habits or old ways of thinking or old ways of being. We are empowered. It just takes practice.
Okay. So I love that video. I love how it brings down, just brings down chaos in the room. I've used it with a youth leadership program, and where we're looking at it, there's a little over 200 adolescents in the room, and we put this on, and just the energy or the as I said, the chaos in the room just comes down, and it's thought-provoking, and it's so helpful to kind of help youth and the families that we work with reframe things and talk about the positive and uplifting things. But oftentimes youth are going to say, I don't have any of that. And then it's our job to help them think about and look at an inventory that they don't frequently look at internally that often, and help them realize how they can move past these things. Youth with these histories of trauma, when they come to us, typically have a default, right? And it's always to attributing negative meanings to things. So helping them reframe again is a big step. Encouraging them to develop a more compassionate inner voice is another tool that can be helpful. And lastly, on this slide, we just have one other quick document. So I like this, it's a visual, right? How it can help them identify when they feel escalated by taking a look at these zones. And when they did, what helped them reset? They may not have thought of it as they were resetting themselves, but if you explore that in conversation with them, either, whether it's in just an individual dyadic kind of thing, or it's in some group work that you're doing, it's telling. It helps them kind of take a look and see where they're at, right? You kind of want to be in that green zone, but you don't necessarily want to kind of shame them for being in others. Just help them understand where they are, where they feel that they are, and maybe why they're there. Breathing might be helpful to them, right? This visual check-in might be another tool to help them regulate themselves and to get back on track. Okay. Next slide, please. All right, so I have this as a participation slide, but I generally have that in, just because I like to shock attendees. They usually freak out when they see participation slide. So that's just been in here from other presentations. So we're just going to kind of pause for a second so you can think of are there things that your agencies or programs that are doing similar to what we've talked about already? And if not, maybe you're scribbling some of these things down on a sticky as we talk, to talk to folks in your programs about maybe looking at some of these things, or enhancing some of the things that you're already doing. I know that there's things to avoid in making connections with youth that you've probably already realized. And they may be some missteps on the part of us as system folks, as helpers and interveners, that we can reflect on. And paying attention to whether or not you see themes or trends for the populations that you work with, and the youth that are coming into contact with you. You know, what does that look like? What do you think those themes or trends are attached to? Is it more in that kind of micro lens where maybe it's with the family? Is it broader when you're looking at more like an exo level of intervention related to community or school or even kind of culture? So some of those are just kind of ways to kind of take a look at how these folks might be impacted. Next slide. So one of the key takeaways today is looking at making sure that our work is trauma informed and what that means. And one of the best ways, I think, or the best tools within a trauma informed practice is sharing power, right? Pretty self-explanatory. You are talking about what your expertise is, and you're more likely to get families and youth to buy in if they see that you're buying in to the skill set that they have. Then I think the phrase lately is what their lived experience is, and that as interveners that we're valuing that. So one of the ways to do that, or one of the outcomes of sharing power and why it's so integral to this practice, is the enhanced participation, right? Like I said before, they're gonna probably engage more in services if they see that you are asking them for their expertise, if you are letting them know that you care about their interests and that you're respecting their experience and their intellect and what they have to bring to the table. And that's what we're talking about when we say a combined experience. You, as the intervener or the provider, get to share your expertise, and families get to contribute their lived experience and kind of claim their own pathway, right? Their own journey to where they got now, good or bad. Basically, two heads are better than one, right? That the sum of the combined experience is just greater than its individual parts. There's really, when you look at the communication, it's a more honest communication. You allow families to kind of speak their truth and feel comfortable about speaking that and providing frank feedback to them. And lastly, sharing power allows us to, do something for ourselves. It counteracts compassion fatigue on the part of us as interveners and providers. Next slide, please. So just kind of quickly, right, a little, an extension of looking at sharing power again and how it improves certainly it's a greater sense of empowerment from the family because of that sharing and that respect for their expertise, and them feeling like now they have a bit of a sense of mastery or competence around working together with providers and more skin in the game. It's more sustainable or enduring change. Sharing that power, after you're giving the examples that you're giving and support that you're giving, if it's a residential program, for example, and then that family's going on to maybe more supportive or long-term housing, that change and the skills that they've honed in their work with you is likely to endure longer. And it helps us in human services, right? Professional development involves our content experience, but also a willingness to learn about ourselves and others. Next slide. So this is just really kind of a quick overview and a visual again for a guide around engaging with youth. Youth in general, but it really can address any number of subpopulations that we have in this the demographic. And one of the key things to remember too is around engaging with youth and in the hopes that they want to continue that relationship and engagement with you, with us, is to set more shorter term goals. They may not be with you that long. So what does that look like? It's going to look differently in your relationship, in your agency's provision of services. But one of the reasons we do shorter term goals is they're more achievable, and youth and families feel success earlier in the process. So they're more likely to kind of buy in and then want to move on to the next goal, the next task. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the youth leadership program that I work with. We use this slide too in talking about cycles of youth engagement. Like what does that look like? How can you help mark that? Because it's just this youth engagement is this large category, and if I threw up an APA format, right, there'd be all of these references to it. Each article would be 20 to 30 pages with all of this data and research. It's just hard to manage. This sort of, I think, helps us get there. And I know DCF has something similar to it, particularly in their work out of the Office of Adolescence. But we talked a good deal in some of the theory about some of the theories and underpinnings before about being trauma informed. But these are the basics, right? Validate or listen without being judgmental, validate honestly and respectfully what it is you're hearing from the youth and the families, authorize them, the youth and the families, to take ownership of that and to support them in acting on some of those things. And then reflect over and over again on your steps. You may need to come back to one of the steps and then go back and reflect again if you need to kind of recorrect, but it's a way to think about the cycle and steps you might want to take. So often these youth working with us have not had significant adults in their lives to practice or even demonstrate these kinds of tasks. So I'm hoping that if you're using this already with youth, that it is working. And if not, maybe it's something that you might want to consider. Next. So relationships in general, and certainly specific to how we interact with our clients, with our consumers, right? Don't just materialize. It's work to develop them. And these are suggestions to how to create those kind of relationships in sort of step form to give this youth or this family some sense of connection and support them in their next steps. So when we look at expressing care, right, show them that they matter to you. In your work with them, be dependable, be accessible, be consistent. Back to the listening, right? Really be present, right? Pay attention. Show them that you believe in them. And you do that by making them feel known, seen, and valued. And to encourage them, to praise them for the efforts. They may be small efforts in what you think should be happening, but praise them anyway, right? Because there's more chance that it's going to be helping them to move forward. So teach by example, include opportunities for different learning styles too. We all, like, I've had a bunch of visuals so far, so I'm more of a visual person. There's the auditory learner, right? The reading and writing, the tactile person. There's, I'm thinking the schools now and the differentiated instruction that teachers need to consider to get their points across and get material across. It's not too different from how we might interact with them. When we're looking at challenging growth, one of the biggest things to remember is in everything we do with these youth and families, debrief at all times. Challenge and growth, I think there's 2 or rather 10 words to live by. What worked, what didn't, and what will we do next time? So there's this assumption by demonstrating that, okay, there are things that just may not work, right? And that's slightly different from the youth's history of attributing, or a default of negativity. That's kind of talking about a reality and how do we just move past that. It's a bump in the road, but we're going to get past that. And it's really important to be outwardly and demonstrative about implementing these steps in relationships. Next slide, please. A couple of other things we can do to help them move past or move forward and have that be a sustainable practice for them is providing support, like navigating, guide them through difficult situations, right? Some of the things that I'm thinking about are the employment history of some of these young adults or these parents, or sometimes both. And we can help practice those situations and interviews and all different kinds of things like that. When they come back from an interview and it didn't work well for them, and it sounds to you like, that really doesn't sound like that was a fair and unbiased kind of interview that they had or experience, advocate for them to the extent that you can, right? Help to build their confidence, set boundaries with them, right? Put limits in place that helps keep them on track. And the same goes with expanding possibilities, right? When you can expose them to advanced leadership opportunities, even within your agency, it's a great experience. But if you can do that in the community, that's even better. Offer trainings and conferences and other sort of events to help them build a sense of confidence and capacity. And when you can, enhance or create opportunities for them to learn from other youth as well. Because this demographic is typically closed off to thinking outside the boxes, right? Next slide. Just again, just a reminder why relationship and connection matter. Young people so often do better when they have these strong relationships, right? Youth who report the wide range of social and emotional strength and other indicators are the ones you see in these leadership programs coming back again to help those who traveled a similar path. They do so much better if we can expose them to webs of relationships with many different people, their peers, as well as more formal kind of system kind of supports. Help them think of some connections that they had that they were helpful. They may not even realize it, but they didn't necessarily get to you or us just by themselves. They may not be ready to take that inventory because of what's happened to them, because so much of it's negative, but likely you can help them discover what was positive in the past, who was positive in the past, and is there a way to reconnect with that particular connection. Next slide. So in some of your programs, through group work or some other interactions, whether it be residential or not, some are drop-in programs, facilitating inclusiveness and through the form of discussion would be important. So again, we're back to looking at some of the skills about listening, right? Being open to others' ideas. Ask them what they might need from others to feel comfortable to actively engage in the conversation or in participation in any of the programs within your particular agency. Challenge them by choice, by being willing to step outside of their comfort zones. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I think so often, and partially because we're not sure of how much time we're going to have with these youth. So we're like firing things out at them and families because they may be just leaving, because that is the pattern of this population sometimes. So we come across, we are very authoritative sometimes. I know I can, with my experience in child welfare, that's my background, is to kind of be directive, particularly when there's so much safety and risk involved. But don't be afraid to ask questions. It does not mean that you don't have to be the expert on everything all of the time, right? Universalizing that us as well, we have challenges that we're facing on a daily basis, but we have a little bit more experience, and we think that we're able to help them because we moved through ours. We're able to help them move through theirs. Next slide. We talked about affirming all youth, and what does that mean? Again, it's addressing more the diversity in this population of homeless youth. And it's always important to know something about your audience and your group before the first meeting, if you can. And if we can take a look quickly at this document, if you're able to pull that up, Heather. Perfect, okay. It's just looking at one subpopulation in the demographic that we're working with, right? And understanding what happened or may have happened to them. And the LGBTQ population in particular comprises so much of the homeless population for various different reasons. And putting ourselves in the position for any group really, but in this group in particular, to have them educate us. I know I feel like this material changes pretty frequently with particularly how they want to be viewed, what their experiences is, how it's called, what the terminology is. I feel like I need to hear it from them before I start making any suggestions or intervening in any kind of way. And I think that validates for them that I want to understand, make sure I learn on what their issues are. I don't know if you can jump down to the last one just quickly. That second slide. The healthy approaches is really what I wanted to, take a look at. And if you notice the verbiage in there, it says child welfare systems. And this is talking about it in the more formal, I guess, verbiage about government in a government agency sense. But this lens throughout this presentation is really kind of looking at child welfare as a condition. And it's our responsibility to help these youth and families improve that condition. Thank you. We could move on. So in next steps, together we can help them decide what their future can be. Next slide, please. So here's where we're getting into the screening piece, right? Getting at what we may not, but we do need to know. And sometimes this is really, really practical kind of thing, right? What are we looking at? Who are we looking at? Are they presenting anything to us that we need to put at the forefront? I like to think of it when I'm looking at and doing work with my students, and we're talking about risk and we're talking about safety. I like to Smokey the Bear it and think about how if Smokey the Bear is not doing something about the smoke, that there's likely going to be fire, right? So the smoke being risk and the fire being safety. So there are issues that may be going on with these youth and these families that are front burner right now. So we need to pay attention to that. So for the sake of time, what I'm going to ask you to do, Melissa or Heather, is we can click on this. I just wanted to show you this potential tool. You don't have to use it, but when youth come to you and you're wondering whether or not there's on safety issues, right? Those are things that you need to break confidentiality for, right? And those, if you look at this particular tool, if you can go quickly to page 2021, This is, I will send this. It's part of the resource slide later. And you can use this if you want, or you could just make up your own if you don't already have one. There we go. So yeah, scroll down a bit. So if you see there with child risk behaviors, and then just go slowly, this is something that you may want to look at, but it's a way, it collects a lot of the information that we should be concerned about if we think that a child has any sort of self-harm issues, danger to self, danger to others, right? If any of these issues are in play, that the youth, the family is really not in a position to accept or really utilize any of the help that we're willing to offer, right? We do need to remind them that, and I'm sure you do this already, everything is confidential unless some of these things come up. The next piece, if you want to move to pages 38, start on 38 through 41. It's looking at the what happened to you topics, right? It's looking at some of the history, and knowing these kinds of things can be helpful to you in your interventions, right? You know what might be hitting home for them, why they might be behaving in a particular way. So that's something to consider. And we'll come back to we'll address it in the next slide too, but if you can just go back real quick to page 9. Those are looking at life domain issues. And page 9 through 20, all along, it starts looking at the life domain issues. It looks at the child's needs, the family's needs. It looks at their strengths as well, and looks at their behavioral and any kind of emotional needs. And you can kind of draw connections here with their family of origin and the impact that has had on them and that you may be seeing. I'm not saying that this is a tool that you need to use, but a lot of this information that would be important to work with this particular population is already here, that DCF put together through the children's systems of care. So it's something that's very helpful. And you may be able to get something through the mental health system as well, through NAMI. They may have it. You may be using your own. But for the purposes of today's presentation, I just wanted to show you this one particular tool that might help you collect information and move through. So we can jump out of this. And if we jump to the next slide, we may have already covered that anyway. Yes. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into this video, but I will send that over. The thematic oh my God, what is it? Let's just jump into it real quick. This one right here. We're not going to watch the whole thing.
Need prescription eyewear fast? Shop hundreds of affordable styles with 2-day delivery at iBuyDirect.com.
I'm just going to give some commentary over it.
Hi everyone, it's Yanis here, and in this video we will explore what is thematic apperception test. To learn more about the person and about their previous experiences, this picture interpretation technique can be used. If this is your first time on this channel, then make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon to get.
Thank you. So this, again, this is not thought to be, I'm not saying that this is a clinical application of this. It just may be, the tools in here may be ways to intervene with youth or families that are not speaking readily, right? They might be more closed off. Showing pictures may be ways. And that might be in a group setting or another kind of setting, maybe ways to kind of get them to open up. You know, what do you see in this picture? That's the whole idea of this particular sort of test that's been used for 50 years or so. It doesn't have to be done in a clinical setting. It's just maybe another way to intervene with a particular youth or family. So we can jump out of that. And next slide. So far, we've kind of talked about helping, intervening, providing, supporting, creating sustainability, all, hands-on helping others. So we really need to be cognizant now, though, of looking inward, right? And how is all of this helping, affecting us, affecting you, right? So the self-care that we were talking about with encouraging in youth and families is something we really need to kind of take a look at in ourselves, right? We hear this over and over again. Mindfulness for ourselves, being forgiving, right? Saying no, right? And part of that is setting those boundaries. Next slide. So some of the things we're going to be taking a look at is defining what helper trauma looks like. You may have heard this with different terminologies, but critical incident stress it's a normal reaction to an abnormal or critical event. But sometimes we don't think that that's normal stress on our part. We start to freak out about that. So having programs or having check-ins within your agency to help you kind of process that information is good, is a good tool to have present. So you are taking care of yourself in your day-to-day work while you're helping others. Next slide. Again, another phrase, secondary traumatic stress, right? Again, it's typical that with all of this helping of others, we are going to have this consequence resulting from that. We're hearing stories over and over and over again, and that is bound to kind of creep into how we view the world. So having those check-ins with other colleagues, family, supportive friends outside the area is important to remember. Next slide. We talked a bit about this before, right? Compassion fatigue, being aware of what you are absorbing, right? And having a system in place to be able to process that is really key. And it is a term that's interchangeably used, sometimes with vicarious trauma, and then the secondary stress. But I love the quote at the bottom, right? That the professional work centered on the relief of emotional suffering of clients, of others, automatically includes this absorbing of information that's about suffering. And often it includes that suffering as well, meaning you're really we're feeling that. Next slide. There's vicarious trauma, like another term, right? We hear that, I think, probably most often. And I want to, I want to de-emphasize the clinical nature of that. Because it's very applicable to us in what we do. We don't have to have experienced that trauma that our clients or consumers are experiencing firsthand. We kind of feel it frequently ourselves. And we need to be aware of that empty cup, right? You're just not, if you're empty, you're not going to be able to pour anything out on others to help them feel better or move forward. Next. Almost finished. So this concept was really specific to trauma therapy work. Some of the thing that Dr. Bruce Perry talks about in his book, What Happened to You, and also the book, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. Great book, by the way, if you get a chance to read that. But the concept's really been expanded to all sorts of humanitarian work. UNICEF folks use this all the time. The effects are felt really beyond a therapeutic relationship, right? It pours over into both personal and other professional relationships. It can impact on a deep level. And the one example I have is really in the field of child abuse and family violence for now 36 years and counting. The lens through which I view things is very different. And you may have some similar stories. When my kids were young, and I was on play dates with what I would call civilians, those are other parents not in the field. It was quite apparent how differently that we viewed things, and you may find the same thing too. Sesame Street, for instance, came up, and I don't know if anyone's heard of the character of Mr. Noodle, but we were watching that one day, and I learned that I really could silence a room when I said, you know, I think that Mr. Noodle's got some kind of grooming characteristics. And then I heard what I said, and then I'm realizing I'm looking through this in a lens that's very different from other people. But if we recognize that, I think it's helpful to us to sort of compartmentalize it and then kind of move past that and apply it when we need to apply it. And the next slide is really kind of talking about some local resources that are available to you within Morris County. The second one is an interesting one, the DCF or DCPMP Adolescent Housing Hub. I don't know if you've ever tried that one. I would go on that and see all of the resources they have in there. If you're working with that youth, particularly in the 17 to 24 year age range, they could really take advantage of some of those things. The continuum of care, I know that's where, you know, that's kind of who all is sponsoring this. The hotline, which also lists the warming centers, Vision and Pathways, awesome agency. In particular, there's Street Smart program. Some of you probably used that already. Roots and Wings, specific to youth who are aging out of foster care. They have apartments that are scattered throughout Morris County, and they have I'm forgetting what the phrase is, a congregate care facility in Union County. And then because it's contiguous, I put on the Sussex County Homeless Outreach as well. And then the last slide is links and resources, and those will all be sent over to you. The developmental assets framework is sort of similar and parallel to the ACEs work, but really helpful ways that they show how to apply that. And then there's more academic kind of things like the Casey Life Skills Toolkit, something you may want to consider for youth and families that are with you more long-term. That's all I have. I apologize if I went over. I was trying to, and the last couple slides we kind of went through quickly, but that's not to say that it's not important, right, to pay attention to what our own inner voice is saying. Like I need some support as well, because that's so key for our ability to continue doing the work that we do. So thank you for that opportunity. However you guys wanted to run this, you said something about having questions for both presenters.
Yes, so I've been monitoring the chat and I haven't seen any questions come through, but if anyone wants to add something in the chat now, or if they want to unmute themselves, they're welcome to ask any specific questions for you, David, and or LaMonica, if they have any questions in regards to that as well. So we'll give it a minute or two to see if anyone has any questions. If no one has any questions now, but maybe they have questions soon, later on, tomorrow, if any of their colleagues would like to see this presentation again, we are going to be sharing it on the Morris County COC YouTube channel. I have their LaMonica's contact information and David's contact information as well. I will put it in the chat. I know LaMonica already put her information in there. And then if you don't get the slides or you don't get this information, you can always email myself, Melissa, or Heather. We will be sending this out hopefully by the end of today, if not tomorrow, to anyone that registered or had asked in the chat for the slides or the recording. We will be sending all the information as well. Okay, no one has any questions. Again, thank you to David, and thank you, LaMonica, for your great presentations. And I want to thank Allison and Rebecca from the CAS committee for letting us utilize the Zoom. and for Cass and the COC for setting up this great presentation so we can present it to you and your fellow colleagues. I want to be mindful of everyone's time, so I will let everyone go a couple minutes early, but thank you again for this great presentation. I hope everyone has a great day.
Thanks for the opportunity, ladies.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.